My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I'd like to welcome you to today's Saturday Dialogue with Lyndon LaRouche. We're going to get right into the core of the problem. The problem, as has been stated, particularly since our conference of 2 weeks plus days ago, is Great Britain, British imperialism, and the cultural disease known as British empiricism. We discussed these matters somewhat at that conference, and in specific, Mike Billington, who will be addressing us today, took up these matters with respect to the way in which British intelligence attempted to manipulate and shape, and successfully shaped, the outlook of China toward the West. But more importantly, now and today, we have something completely different going on, in which President Trump, and also at least through the spokesman, Secretary of State Tillerson, are trying to assert a relationship with China, which has, again, various of the media pundits very puzzled. But if you understand the role of British intelligence in the British system, and you understand the impulse of the American system, there's nothing to be puzzled about at all. Now, we have a crisis. It's a deep one, but it's a navigable one. And so to talk about what that crisis looks like now, and what our association and what the Manhattan Project needs to do about that crisis, we're going to hear from Mike. He'll give a presentation, and then we'll go to questions and answers. So, Mike?
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I'm going to do pretty much what I did last night on the webcast. So for those of you who watched the webcast, I'm going to go through the same thing, but I think it's worth thinking about, and we'll have time for a Q&A so we can have some discussion. So think of some good questions to ask. I'm reviewing a paper which was published in the Executive Intelligence Review this week, along with the presentations of the second day of our conference last week, with the brilliant speech by Helga on the relationship between Confucianism and the European Renaissance, especially the work of Friedrich Schiller, the inspiration for the Schiller Institute, and the presentation by Patrick Ho and my own, as well as by David Wong. So on these issues of the philosophical relations and the difficulties. But also in that issue is an article I wrote on the Korea crisis, which has reached very clearly a very severe crisis point. The name of the article is "Why is Korea Not Reunified Already?" And the purpose is to demonstrate that in the past, in the 90s, and then again in 2002 and 3, we were very, very close to bringing a permanent peace to the Korean Peninsula, the last outpost of British destabilization and instability in Asia. And how that was sabotaged entirely by the fact that we had in the White House for the 16 years leading into the Trump election, agents of the British Empire, whose purpose was to sabotage any peace in Asia in order to maintain a British division of East versus West. And it's key to recognizing that the core of empire depends upon keeping people divided over ethnic issues, religious issues, over contested territory, but most fundamentally keep the East versus West divide. So this is the sense with which I want to give a sense of how it is that this current crisis came about. Let me give a couple of updates, which I think are very important because there's a positive potential that is playing out right now on this issue of the Korea crisis. Remember what Helga said at the beginning of her speech on the first day of the conference, where she said, despite the fact that President Trump had been lied to, had been given fake intelligence, and was induced to carry out a foolish attack on a Syrian Air Force base, that nonetheless, Helga said, if Trump proceeds with bringing the United States into a partnership with China and in particular joins the New Silk Road, joins the Belt and Road Initiative, that he can and will go down as one of the greatest presidents in American history. Now, this is very important to recognize. Now, what's happened just in the last 48 hours? The North Korean crisis, let me say first, this is, if there were an attack on North Korea, this would be nothing like the sort of pinprick attack on an Air Force base in Syria. If there were an attack on North Korea, even if it took out the nuclear weapons capacities in the North, there would be almost 100% certainty of a North Korean attack on at least South Korea, perhaps in Japan. But remember that the North Koreans have massive artillery capacity, even if they didn't have their nuclear weapons. And their North Korean border is 30 miles from Seoul, this beautiful advanced city of Seoul, 30 miles away. So with their artillery, they could absolutely lay waste, not just to the American base in Seoul, but to the entire city. This would almost certainly lead to a global war and to a nuclear holocaust. So we're dealing here with a very severe crisis. I'll mention that our friends in South Korea have insisted that in South Korea, there is general calm. They're more involved in the election that's taking place for May 9th. But they have been through this before, and they believe, generally people believe, that nobody is insane enough to start a war on North Korea, knowing what the consequences would be. Is that true? Well, we're forced to consider that Trump was induced to carry out that false intelligence attack against Syria. Would he be induced to do the same? Now, we have positive information from the last 48 hours. First of all, Trump himself yesterday, in an interview with Reuters, said, reiterated his very, very strong connection to Xi Jinping, to China. He said, we'd love, on the North Korea issue, he said, we'd love to solve this thing diplomatically, but it's very difficult. I believe Xi Jinping is trying very hard. I know he would like to be able to do something. Perhaps it's possible. Perhaps he can't, but I think he's trying to do something. And then he said about Kim Jong-un, the current leader in North Korea, which I think is very interesting. He said he's 27 years old. His father dies. He took over a regime. So say what you want, that's not easy, especially at his age. Now, I'm not giving him credit or not giving him credit. I'm just saying that it's a very hard thing to do. And as to whether or not he's rational, I have no opinion on it, but I hope he's rational. Meaning we need to talk. We need to sit down and talk. And that was made very clear by Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Tillerson, in the UN Security Council meeting, which he chaired yesterday, he said, quote, for too long, the international community has been reactive in addressing North Korea. Those days must come to an end. Failing to act now on the most pressing security issue in the world may bring catastrophic consequences. The Chinese Foreign Ministry repeated that warning that if there's not a solution to this, the results could be catastrophic. Now, what does Rex Tillerson mean? If you believe the headlines in the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and so forth, and Fox, what he means is we're going to go to war if they don't stop it. That's not what he means. And it's very clear from his collaboration with China that that's not what he means. He means that there are alternatives to change the insane situation that we had under Obama. Under Obama, the policy towards North Korea was what he called strategic patience, which was a nice term for saying, we refuse to talk to you about anything until you do exactly what we say, that you must shut down your nuclear weapons program, and then maybe we'll talk to you. But in the meantime, we're building up the most massive military power around your borders, and that we are imposing greater sanctions and preparing for war. Now, this is where what Tillerson and Trump are doing, although it's still possible that they could make a blunder of making an attack. They're trying to create a circumstance in which there can be brought about new discussions with the North, with others, to bring about a peaceful solution. This is very much up to us, that we pursue this new Silk Road direction. And what Helga said about making the Silk Road function, getting the US involved, is the only basis on which you're going to have a solution to Korea, because the Korea issue can't be looked at as a situation on its own. It's part of a global crisis, and its solution has to be a singularity within a global solution, which is to bring the world together in a new paradigm for development. The key to this, again, is why in the world, well, I'll come back to this, but I want you to think about why in the world the US would have been so stupid as to refuse to talk to a country which is in the process of building nuclear weapons. And this is what I want to convey now, that in the past there were these two times where we were very, very close, why that failed under Bush and Cheney and then under Obama. So let me go back and review that. This started in the 1990s. The North Koreans were signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is agreed that they would not build nuclear weapons or exchange nuclear weapon material, but they were allowed to build nuclear, peaceful nuclear energy facilities. And they had one, a very small test reactor, a 5 megagram megawatt facility, just 5. But it was a graphite moderated reactor which produced plutonium, and there were indications to the International Atomic Energy Agency, which was there inspecting, that some of that plutonium was not being accounted for. So they were concerned that they might have been building nuclear weapons with that plutonium. So this led to a very near-term potential war. This was the Clinton administration. His defense secretary, William Perry, believed that if it were confirmed that they had, in fact, diverted plutonium and were building bombs, that there was that they would take out the Pyongyang plant. It wouldn't be a full-scale assault on North Korea, but they would try to take out that plant. It was a near-term potential crisis. At that time, Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter, went to North Korea, met with Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung, who was the leader of North Korea from the time of after the Second World War, when the Koreas were divided, and had a very positive meeting and basically set in motion an agreement between the Clinton administration and South Korea and North Korea, with China, Japan, and Russia basically going along with this. It was called the Agreed Framework. And this was really a pretty extraordinary an agreement. The idea was that North Korea would literally take apart the Yongbyon nuclear plant, tear it down. In exchange, the US would build them a full-scale 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plant that would be a light water reactor and did not produce plutonium as a side effect of the reaction. Was safer. It didn't produce a weapon-grade material. This began. The US and South Korea began building a nuclear reactor for North Korea, which sounds strange in today's terms after what we've gone through, but that's what they were doing. And they were also providing them with oil in the meantime until the plant got constructed. In the process, the IAEA inspectors were there monitoring this material, and there were pledges that they would move towards establishing a peace agreement. The North Koreans and the Americans are still officially at war. After the Korean War, there was an armistice signed, but not a peace treaty. So they would move towards a peace agreement, which means normal relations between North Korea and America, and there would be no more US threats of attacking North Korea. So this proceeded. William Perry, who was the defense secretary then, in the first term of Clinton. The second term he wasn't, but he continued working on North Korea. And in a recent article, he said that we were moving in the second Clinton term very, very far ahead towards eliminating any nuclear weapons program and establishing a peaceful relationship. They even had set up a presidential visit from Clinton to North Korea. It didn't come off, and then the administration ran out of time, and you ended up with Bush and Cheney. Now, what happened under Bush and Cheney? Let me add. In the meantime, in 1998, the South Koreans elected Kim Dae-jung to be their president, and Kim Dae-jung is a very important figure. He had been a fierce opponent of the military regimes that had been in charge of Korea. Under Park Chung-hee, the first of those military presidents, he had turned Korea into a miracle, from one of the most destitute, war-torn countries into one of the most advanced industrial and scientific nations on earth. So there were very positive things to say about the military leadership. They were elected military to the presidency, but Kim Dae-jung had fought that. He'd been in prison several times. He actually was threatened with death at one point, and the US stepped in to save him. And then in '98, he was elected president, and he moved towards democracy policies within South Korea. But most importantly, he set up what was called the Sunshine Policy with the North. He went to visit Kim Jong-il, who was the son of Kim Il-sung, who died soon after the agreed framework. But his son continued the process. The two Kims met. They established relationships. They began working with Clinton and Perry towards these kinds of agreements. And then Bush and Cheney came in. So what happened? You might remember that the defense secretary under Bush and Cheney was Colin Powell, a reasonable person, who in his very first press conference said, we will engage with North Korea. We will pick up where Clinton left off. Literally the next day, Bush and Cheney stepped in and said, like hell, we will not engage North Korea. They're a brutal dictatorship, which I'm sure sounds familiar to everybody these days. We won't work with a brutal dictatorship. They must do what we say or else. And basically refuted Colin Powell's policy and the Clinton policy, and set in motion what in fact became North Korea having now 10 to 20 nuclear weapons. That's how smart it was to stop discussions with North Korea. Now, the question to be asked, and I'll come back to this, was that just stupidity, bad policy, that they end up with nuclear weapons? Or was it their intent? Well, it is in fact their intent, and I will return to that. Now, what happened subsequent to that is that South Korea's Kim Dae-jung and the Chinese and the Russians and the Japanese did not give up, despite the insanity of the Bush-Cheney British policy, British agents in the White House. They proceeded, and by 2002, we had an absolutely extraordinary development taking place there. And I must point out, this had a great deal to do, a significant amount to do with Lyndon LaRouche's personal intervention. We were at that time, one of our EIR representatives, Kathy Wolf, was traveling back and forth on a regular basis. You all remember that in 1992, with the fall of the Soviet Union, Lyndon and Helga LaRouche had initiated the idea of the new Silk Road. The idea that we could bridge Europe, Russia, China, through high-speed rail, development corridors, collaboration on common aims of these nations and the common aims of mankind. This concept was being taken in from Lynn, his writings, to the people in the presidency and in the cabinet, people outside the government. It was being circulated widely throughout Korea and elsewhere. And Kim Dae-jung adopted a policy which he called the Iron Silk Road. Now, this wasn't entirely only from Lynn, of course, but it's very important to recognize that this was a global concept which Lynn was bringing into the Korean situation. From the beginning, Lynn described the new Silk Road as going from Busan to Rotterdam, Busan being at the southern tip of South Korea. It was always necessarily encompassing taking those rail connections through South Korea, through North Korea, into Russia, and into China. So by 2002, we had this extraordinary situation. I'm going to show you a map. You see the border down there towards the bottom. What Kim Dae-jung worked out with Kim Jong-il in the north was that they would reconstruct the railroad connections that had been severed since the Second World War and the Korean War. Two of them. One of them on the far west, which went from Seoul up into Kaesong, and I'll mention Kaesong in a minute, and then up through Pyongyang into China through two directions. The second one going towards the east.
Mike?
Yes. Yes.
You're not putting the slide up.
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought that would do it. Why doesn't it do it?
Before, I don't know.
I'm not sure how to even get back to where I was now. Let me try again. Screen share. Screen share. Do you see it now? Do you see it now?
No, we don't.
No. Okay. Damn it. I had it working before, but it's not working now. Screen share. Share.
That
Let me
looks
try.
like, there you go. There you go.
Oh,
That's, you got it. That's
all
the-
right. You see the two rail routes that I mentioned, from Seoul up through Kaesong and then up, two of them into China over here, connecting with the Trans-China Railway, and one of them going towards the east, up all the way along the North Korean coast, all the way up into Russia, into Vladivostok, and connecting with the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So this was an extraordinary plan. It basically was the basis upon which you'd locate the common aims of the Korean peoples, North and South Korea, and through development, basically create the conditions by which you could move towards reunification. In 2002, this resulted in this beautiful picture of a South Korean railroad crossing the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. And this was a no man's land with a strip between North and South Korea, demilitarized, full of landmines, literally a no man's land. Many people got killed when they were accused of going into the DMZ, and the other side would shoot them. It was a treacherous time. What happened in 2002 is that the fences along the DMZ were cut. And you had soldiers from the north and the south going into the DMZ in order to demine the area. This railroad, they reconstructed a strip, not the whole rail all the way to the north, but at least across the border. And this railroad with a big banner in the front saying something about the reunification of the Koreas, with people from North and South Korea on both sides. A truly inspiring moment in history. Now, not only did, am I back now? Can you see me again? Yeah. Not only did they get this railroad going, but other things were initiated in 2002. You had the creation of Kaesong in that village that you saw there right across the northern border. They made an agreement between North and South for South Korean companies to set up factories there with North Korean labor. So you had the basis of the strong industrial power in the South with the highly skilled labor in the North working together as a basis for establishing long-term economic cooperation and development. He also set up something, the Chinese actually stepped in, and in collaboration with South Korea and North Korea and Russia and Japan and the United States, although the United States agreed reluctantly, to set up what were called six-party talks between those six countries on the basis of establishing this sunshine policy and collaboration for long-term growth. I'll mention that Japan was very much part of this. The prime minister at that time, Koizumi, traveled to North Korea. Both sides apologized. The Japanese for having occupied Korea before the Second World War. And the North Koreans apologized for having abducted some people from Japan and bringing them back to North Korea. So that was moving forward on collaboration. And I won't go through it here for a matter of time, but the Bush-Cheney team participated. They felt it necessarily, but they sabotaged this every step of the way. Every time they could, they'd say North Korea is cheating, North Korea is lying, they're not living up to their promises. And eventually, it just sort of, they came to some agreements, but they never quite got implemented. When Obama came in, he continued the same sabotage, basically, and through adopting his strategic patience. And eventually, the six-party talks ended, and you had nothing but conflict and the insane Obama policy. Now, this is where, and of course, Obama launched his pivot to Asia, which was an entirely anti-China policy. And the buildup of the military forces around Korea were clearly aimed not at Korea really at all, but against China. And the THAAD missile deployment, which just took place this last week, literally days before the Korean election, in which the leading candidate is opposed to the THAAD elections, to the THAAD deployment. that those are opposed by China and Russia, not because they're defending North Korea, but because the THAAD missiles have no effect on North Korea. They're terminal high altitude missiles. North Korea doesn't need to send intercontinental ballistic missiles to attack Seoul. You know, it's artillery. So these are useless against Korea, but the X-band radar that goes with it sees deep into China and into the far east of Russia. And the Russians and the Chinese have made very clear that if this is deployed, they are going to necessarily take countermeasures because the balance of power has been disrupted. And these radar systems would make possible, in the mind of the lunatics on the US side, would make possible a first strike, just like the missiles in Europe against Russia. They believe would make possible a first strike in which there would not be a retaliation. They could take out Russia and China's retaliation. So they're necessarily going to have to combat this. So this is not aimed at North Korea. Why would Bush, Cheney, and Obama take policies which they knew would lead to North Korea having nuclear weapons? Because, as William Perry said in this recent article, they know, as well as William Perry, that North Korea is a reckless regime, but they're not crazy. They're not suicidal. They're not going to use a nuclear weapon against anybody. They know they'd be blown off the face of the map if they were to do so. North Korea is looking at Syria. They're looking at Iraq and Libya, who gave up their nuclear weapons programs and then were bombed back to the Stone Age and their leaders killed, assassinated. They know this. They know this was the policy of Obama. So therefore, they're not going to give up their nuclear weapons as long as the US is threatening a regime change policy. Now this, again, is very important that Tillerson said we are not interested in regime change. Do they mean it? Well, we'll see. But in any case, the policy was use the fact that North Korea, this is British, this is the core of British imperial thinking. Keep this instability so that we can build up a massive military force around China, as we are around Russia in Europe, building up anti-ballistic missile systems in Europe, building up NATO tanks and airplanes and troops right on Russia's border, completely surround Russia and China with a military force capable of carrying out in their warped minds a global nuclear war. So as the Russian the deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Safrankov, as I'm sure all of you know, last week in the UN Security Council, directly addressed the British ambassador, Rycroft, and said to his face, we know what you're doing. We know what you're losing sleep over. Everyone here knows what you're doing. You're concerned, you're afraid that the United States and Russia are going to become friends. This is what you're doing, and the world knows it. Now, this is very important. This is really the first leader around the world outside of Lyndon LaRouche who has identified the vile, evil role of the British Empire today. It's not a historical issue. It's functioning today. So this is the level of insanity around North Korea. But again, like what he's addressing about Russia and the United States, what Trump is leading here in working with China is potentially knocking out the British Empire's last point of instability in Asia, and all of Asia would be united, and then through the new Silk Road, united with all the rest of Eurasia, and with Africa, with South America, and with the United States if Trump joins in the new Silk Road. I'll just say another one or two words about the current situation in Korea in case people want to have some sense of that. When Park Geun-hye was elected president almost 6 years ago, she's the daughter of Park Chung-hee, the guy who built Korea, who turned it into this economic and scientific miracle. But she was elected largely because of her name. She started off well. She had what she called the Eurasian vision, which was very much in keeping with the Eurasian land bridge, and was something that could have brought about a solution to the North Korea situation. She even went to the 70-year anniversary of the end of World War II in Beijing and stood proudly with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. And she was allowing South Korean companies, even though there was no official agreements between North and South Korea, she was allowing South Korean corporations, their steel, rail, and shipping companies, to work with Russia in a consortium with North Korea, shipping Russian coal through a port in North Korea, which they helped rebuild, and shipping it through South Korean ships into South Korea, South Korean railroads, South Korean steel plants. So this stuff was moving. And then North Korea did its fourth nuclear test, and Park Geun-hye completely capitulated to Obama. She shut down the Kaesong plant that had been operating since 2002. All these factories were shut down, hurting South Korean industry. She shut down the Razon port where the coal from Russia was coming through, shut down all ties with the North, exactly what Obama and the British wanted. And to the point where she was not impeached because of that. She was impeached over an internal corruption crisis. But the fact that she'd done this, she broke the trust with the industrial sector that wanted to work with North Korea, broke the trust of the so-called left or the liberal sides who wanted collaboration with North Korea and China and Russia. She lost trust generally and was then taken down over a corruption scandal. And we have the election May 9th. And as I said, the deployment of the THAAD literally days ahead of time was a very foolish move. But we have, if you look at the fact that whoever wins the election there, he's going to be one of the so-called leftist or opposition side who wants relations with North Korea, Russia, and China. We have Japan under Abe working closely with Putin and Russia. We have Trump, who wants to have good relations, definitely wants to have good relations with China and should be able to restore what he wanted to do originally with Russia. So the potential is tremendous. The danger, as we've laid out, is equally fantastic. We're at a moment really of make or break. It's a moment of truth for mankind. And as Helga entitled her speech, this is a moment where what's the choice? Nuclear war or a new Silk Road and global development of mankind. So that's where I'll stop and be glad to take some comments and questions.
Okay, so people should go to the microphone who have questions. Mike, I want to ask you something myself, because I think you should comment at some length on this if you wish, which is at the end of the Second World War, we have the phenomenon of Churchill's Fulton, Missouri speech. We have the division, we have East and West Germany, we have East and West Pakistan, we have North and South Vietnam, we have North and South Korea, of course, as a result of the war. Could you say something about how the British factor has shaped, and of course you mentioned the administrations, that's what we of course are here to concentrate on, but how the British factor shapes the present circumstance?
Well, actually, last night in the webcast, if you watched it, Matthew Ogden had really, I should have gotten this for today. He had a beautiful statement from General Douglas MacArthur, who had, been the U.S. general in not only who occupied Japan after having surrounded Japan without the atomic bomb, by the way, which would never have been used if MacArthur had had his way and if Roosevelt had not died and the British influence over the puppet Truman had not come to bear to use those nuclear weapons when in fact Japan had already been cut off and had sued for peace. MacArthur, the use of those nuclear weapons was not to defeat Japan, it was to show the rest of the world that the United States was crazy enough and the British crazy enough to use nuclear weapons to force nations to bend to their will. This was classic British evil. But the statement by MacArthur, I'm sorry I don't have it to read, after the Korean War, in which he had also been the victorious leader up to a point when Truman fired him, but basically had stopped the North Korean invasion of South Korea and saved South Korea. But his statement said that this is a theological issue. It's a philosophic issue, that war creates hell and chaos. It drives nations to destroy themselves, that this is an issue which requires that people look at the fact that we are all human beings. And I don't have the quote in front of me, but I think it represents the best of the American tradition. MacArthur was beyond any doubt, the greatest American general. And that this, unfortunately, this continuing division of the world, which took place after the war, would not have happened under Roosevelt, just as the nuclear bombs wouldn't have happened under Roosevelt. So the unfortunate death just before the end of the war caused these divisions. And the intent of the so-called Cold War was to destroy Roosevelt's idea, not only idea, but his actual actions of working with Russia and China to defeat fascism. And as Roosevelt said to Winston Churchill's face, we are not fighting this war to save the British Empire. There shall be no more empire. But under Truman, you had basically the US turned their war machine over to the British and the French and the Dutch to reoccupy their colonies, to divide countries, to divide Vietnam, to divide Korea, to divide, and of course, Germany and others. But to maintain that division, that's the intent of these divisions. The Russians would not have demanded the division of these countries between so-called communist governments and democratic governments, if it were not for the fact that the British were effectively launching full-scale war policies under the guise of fighting communist insurgency. And the British were very clear about this. We must maintain our colonies because otherwise communism will seize the world. Therefore, we have to restore our colonies. Well, this is, of course, insane. Look at Vietnam, you know? I mean, we fought that horrible genocidal war, a war that dragged the United States into British imperial warfighting. On behalf of who? On behalf of America? It destroyed America. It nearly destroyed Vietnam. Millions and millions of people killed. For what reason? No reason. We lost the war and Vietnam prospered and is now our friend. Isn't that ironic? And still communist in name, because what does communism mean? It's an artifact, it's a structure. It does not identify what the British are concerned with. And you can see that clearly now. This division between East and West that we discussed here. You know, in the past, this was godless communism against the free world, right? Well, now godless communism's gone, but they're still saying Russia's our enemy, they're the aggressor. It's based upon dumbing down the population so much that they accept the idea that there's no way for the world to be united. You say, let's have a new Silk Road, a new paradigm. What's the response you get from the New York Times and people who unfortunately read the New York Times? You can't do that. Human nature won't allow it. Human nature is going to be conflict, fighting over the spoils, zero-sum games. We have to gain at your behalf. The Darwinian idea of survival of the fittest, that we must be strong to defeat the weak. The idea of win-win, the idea of a common aims to mankind, as Helga calls it, this is by the geopoliticians, by the British imperial thinkers, doesn't exist. Mankind is not human, they're animals. And we have to treat mankind like animals in order to maintain our power and wealth. So we're now at the point where it's going to be decided one way or the other. Either we're going to move away from this, what Helga calls the childhood of mankind, become adults, build a world that's based on the collaboration around our actual human common interests, and end this idea of imperial warfare or global warfare once and for all. Is that utopian? No, I don't think so at all. If we have a world that's based upon the common aims of mankind to develop the Earth and the Moon and the solar system, then there's no reason to think that we cannot prevent the imperial-induced warfare, which has characterized the last century.
Right. Right.
Hi, Mike, Alvin, and wanted to talk with you and hear what you had to say. We had a discussion recently, actually last night, and it was around culture. It was around the development and building of our chorus and building our audience for anything and everything that we do, but particularly around music. Of course, there are the things that we know, just in terms of the condition of our average citizen, the kind of mental slavery and so on, that this culture has been imposed upon them and has been adopted to the point where things that are of life-saving relevance they don't penetrate. They're not really understood. And so we say, okay, the development of music, of classical composition, bringing people into that process is really the only way we have available, and we see it works to help free their minds. But what was raised as a real provocation, where you have to really grasp the moment that you're in, was when it was said, look, you have to think of this. You have to keep in mind, for example, of the Korean crisis here. What is the potential in North Korea? So here we are on the one hand talking about our cultural work, yet the reality of the current state of the world was introduced, and that if you're looking to organize, you must have this with you as you're looking to, if you really want to build a chorus, if you really want to get people to come in, instead of taking we're kind of special, we have good music, you should really come, you'll like it, it'll help you. And so this was very gripping because it's easy to backslide into what I just referenced on kind of like, nice guy stuff, as opposed to the real tension and the short time we're on to turn this around. So, and that this is the way to find the greatest minds, if only if you have that in mind as you look to develop people and bring them in. So just, would like to hear more from you on this, because I think there's a lot to it.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be in New York for the conference you had on the 13th and 14th, and attended the concert you had on Friday night, which was really a powerful event. I won't describe it here. Many of you were there. Most of you were probably there. But what was really striking in the chorus was this large, mostly soprano section of Chinese singers from, as I understand it, from Flushing, where we've been systematically building a chorus there out of existing groups that were involved in singing, and who, many of them, were so excited by our taking on choral work, but choral work at the very, very highest level, meaning at the greatest music of all mankind. As you know, we sang the Bach, the two Kyries from the B minor Mass by Bach. Powerful work, very difficult. And the few discussions I had there with the Chinese and a Russian lady who was there was that this is so difficult, but so incredibly moving. It's in my head. Everything I've thought about day and night for the last months that we've been doing this is this incredible Bach piece. This is, as you were indicating, Alvin, this is the basis on which you uplift the minds of people to not only enjoy music, but to think about beauty and about creativity, and to truly consolidate in their minds that these political issues can and must be resolved, that beauty is the basis for solving them. And I will simply add that I just recently, in reviewing some of our own work in Korea in order to prepare this piece, I also came across some of the work that the same lady, Kathy Wolf from EIR, did in Korea at the time on the incredible classical music tradition in Korea, especially since, in the modern era, since the development of Korea, but not simply rejecting Korean music and adopting Western music, but rather looking very much the way Dvorak did with the American folk songs and Native American music and the Negro spirituals in America, taking these traditions that represented a classical approach to music, meaning not bebop and not gospel and not not folk music in the banal sense, but like the Negro spirituals, music that was coming from the heart with a mission, which had a classical nature to it, and using the classical developments of Western Europe to lift those concepts, those ideas into a classical framework, which became universal. And Kathy did some wonderful work on that, on some some Korean art songs, very much in the tradition of the German leader. And if you look at our that classical culture in the West today, in Europe and the United States, I'm sure you've noticed that an incredibly large proportion of our orchestras and our choruses and our opera stars are Korean and Chinese. There's a tradition there which can and must be tapped at the very highest level as the basis for creating the cultural connection along philosophic lines, as well as along the lines of pure beauty in music, which has to be hand in hand with the fight that we're launching. And as I've mentioned before, I think when people attend our conferences and are uplifted to these ideas of economic and philosophic cooperation with all of mankind, back in the back of their minds is this idea of, well, this is all very nice, but you know, it's not going to work because after all, we're all human and we're going to end up squabbling and fighting and wanting to take for ourselves against everybody. That's just human nature. It's been beaten into us from the time we were born in this country, that's all we are in this modern era, and you know that we're all basically what the British say we are, animals. But when you go to the concert, or especially if you participate in the chorus, then those doubts are wiped out on the inside, in your heart. They're wiped out from the true humanity that exists with every person. What Leibniz said was that the truth is written in our hearts. And this is something that the Jushi, the great Sung dynasty, Confucian Renaissance leader, said almost the same words, that the heart of man, and in Chinese, the heart and mind are actually the same word, that the heart and mind of man is benevolence, is love for mankind. That the truth of the uniqueness of man created in the image of God as the creator, that this is something that is the true nature of man, not the animal instinct, not the barbarism. So I completely agree with you that the music issue here is not just a nice side issue for entertainment. Far from it. It's the very core of whether or not we're going to succeed in building a true new global renaissance.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thanks.
Rick from New Jersey. It seems that these rogue elements, these lunatics, however you want to describe them, have put us at grave risk. I mean, I feel incredible tension over this North Korea situation, and to the point where I would consider it to be criminal activity. It kind of reminds me of the Cuba Missile Crisis, but it seems we have a hair trigger situation which could be set off not necessarily through a direct attack. In other words, it could be the case that if the pressure increases on North Korea, there could be rogue elements within North Korea, for all we know, who could get the leader, Kim Jong-un, to overreact, think he's being attacked, get it to a level of pressure where he just presses a button and launches an attack without actually having been physically attacked. That's how I feel the situation has been created here. Now, in light of that, I'd like to suggest and see what your reaction is, possible ways of dealing with this diplomatically. Seems that perhaps one of the things that's stopping up or creating the blocks to diplomatic communication is this technical state of war between the United States and North Korea. So the first thing I would suggest is that the United States and North Korea immediately resolve that and enter into a peace agreement so that we could have diplomatic channels opened up. So once that state of war is dropped, get meetings between high-level diplomats from South Korea, North Korea, China, and the U.S., and basically come to agreements and start developing the challenged or poor, from what reports we get, poor economy in North Korea, to get them onto the Belt and Road and to immediately enter into projects to get these things going. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that was what the agreed framework was, and that's what was being done with the Iron Silk Road in 2002. And you're absolutely right. What the Chinese are trying to do now, and as I said, also the two candidates who are, one of the two of them is almost certainly going to be elected on May 9th in South Korea, is offer a peace agreement. And the North Koreans are saying exactly the same thing. The North Koreans, I don't have it in front of me right now, but a statement just today from the North Korean Foreign Ministry, I believe, was, did I write it down? Yes. It was a North Korean spokesman at the United Nations who said that the reason for the nuclear weapons is entirely the hostility from the United States. Every solution will be possible when the hostile policy from the US is withdrawn. Now, I'm not, a scholar on North Korea. I'm not an expert in every aspect of things. It's very difficult to know what's going on there anyway, even the experts. But I can tell you by working in Washington with the various US diplomats and scholars that the best of them who go to North Korea very often very much agree with what William Perry said, that I said the other day, that they are reckless, but they're not crazy. They're not suicidal. They're not going to start a war. And many of them say they're actually doing quite well in building the North Korean economy. And that this statement, for instance, from a North Korean spokesman at the UN is exactly what they believe. That if they can, in fact, be convinced that the US is serious about wanting to solve the problem, rather than their recognition, and believe me, the North Koreans recognize what I said before, that the purpose of the US was not just North Korea, it was China. It was to keep the world divided. But if they're convinced that the US wants to have peace with China and also wants to solve the North Korea problem, that it is absolutely feasible. Let me add one thing that I didn't mention before that Rex Tillerson said when he was speaking at the UN Security Council yesterday, yesterday. Besides saying what he said about, we have to change, we have to do away with the Obama strategic patience, he said, our goal is not regime change, nor do we desire to threaten the North Korean people or destabilize the Asia-Pacific region. Since 1995, the US has provided $1.3 billion in aid to North Korea, and we look forward to resuming our contributions once the country dismantles its weapons programs. Now, that 1995, remember what I said, the agreed framework was 1994. So here's Tillerson very much bringing up to the North Koreans, remember the agreed framework. Remember that we were willing at that time when we had sane leaders. And recall that Trump ran not only against the Obama Democrats, but against the Bush Republicans, the neocons. So he's basically saying, look back to 1994-95, the agreed framework. That's in our minds. That's what we wish to do, what you laid out, which means we work towards a written agreement that this hostility, this threatened regime change, this do what we say or we'll blow you up mentality will be replaced by an agreement for peace and agreement for establishing normal relationships between the US and North Korea. So again, this, I agree with you. This is a point that could blow the world up. And we have to put the situation there in the context of this, basically showdown over the future of civilization.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Howard, just before you come to the mic, let me just say the following. Since we know that in 2 weeks, there will be 2 weeks from today, this celebration in New York City, the Immortal Regiment idea. And know, as we will make clear in a few moments, that the president of the Philippines has now called for a shutdown of the New York Times, and others are talking about a boycott of the New York Times from the Philippines. It should be kept in mind that the Manhattan Project can play an immediate role in reinitiating certain matters. You just heard, and we are aware of what happened with the representative, Mr. Ilyachev, who came to our conference 2 weeks ago. And people are aware of, obviously, what Patrick Ho's role was in terms of what happened in our discussions about the Silk Road. What's important is to understand that these things are actionable and that there are ideas and actions that can be taken instantly. For example, what Mike has just gone through could be spread very far and wide, including by people in this room, via various forms of social media and on the streets of New York, both in the form of various Facebook, et cetera, channels, but also in terms of the distribution of our Hamiltonian and our other work. So I just wanted to make sure this is said, since there's a phone call Monday, there'll be a phone call Thursday, and there are actions that, as I just said, should result in significant presence in the city of New York over the next few weeks. Okay.
Hi, Mike. It's Howard in New York.
Hi, Howard.
I just want to bring up a historical issue that may be relevant now in terms of the war party and what they are or what they're not, in terms of the Korean War. And it might sound like a bit of an academic question, but we remember General MacArthur made the Incheon landing in the Korean War, and then there was a breakthrough, and then there was a certain dispute as the Chinese entered the war, and MacArthur was fired allegedly because he wanted to bomb the Yalu River bridges and bomb the Chinese. So anyway, I know MacArthur in many ways was a great leader, but I just thought it might be interesting to bring it up because it gets me a little bit confused on this point of policy.
Well, the North Korean, the Korean War, very, very complex issue that I don't think I can speak on authoritatively. Why the North invaded the South is not clear. There are those who argue that it was induced by Stalin. There are those who blame the Chinese. There was a growing conflict between Russia and China already at that time. Why it happened is not clear. What Douglas MacArthur wanted to do was that he was warning that the Chinese were preparing to come in. Because remember, I mean, he had not only, remember I mentioned Busan, which is the very southern tip of South Korea. When he came in, he was in Japan. He was brought in to respond to the North Korean invasion of South Korea. And the North took the entirety of South Korea, except for a little pocket at the very far tip around Busan. And Roosevelt came in and he basically fortified that southern region and was fighting along the battle line. But then he made the brilliant Incheon landing, where he basically brought his forces, enveloped the North Koreans in South Korea by attacking up close to Seoul and cutting off the supply lines, and was then able to basically drive the North Koreans back into the north. And he kept going and drove them right up to the very northern border with China. And he warned that the Chinese were going to intervene. The Chinese ultimately did. Again, why they did is not 100% clear. It was certainly not something the Chinese wanted. They had just established the People's Republic of China. The Korean War was devastatingly destructive to China at a time where they were trying to take a country that was in very sad shape and bring it forward. If he had bombed the Yalu River bridges, would it have prevented the Chinese from coming in? I don't know. It's hard to say. What's known is that Truman was a puppet to the British, and the British hated Douglas MacArthur, absolutely hated him. They wanted a divided Korea, just as they wanted a divided Vietnam, and the British fought like hell to get the U.S. to go in and take over for the French when the North Koreans defeated the French, or when the communists defeated the French. So, I mean, these are difficult issues, but I will mention one thing. I should have included in the article links to 2 videos that were done by our younger members in Purcellville. One is on the Incheon landing that was done by Asuka Saito, which is a very, very good video showing what the envelopment process was, what MacArthur did. And a second one on a lot of the history I've just gone through of the North and South Korean issues and the development processes. I'll make a point of digging out the links to those 2 videos and sending them out to people that it's worth watching.
Okay, good. Next.
Hello, Mike. And what comes to my mind, and I think to some of the older members in the labor committees in May also, is that at a certain point, Lyndon LaRouche made the statement when the new Trump administration came in, I believe that was when, that there was one person there who didn't belong with Trump. That was Stephen Mnuchin. That this guy, he might have been all right with Hillary Clinton, but he did not belong with Trump, because Trump has had some good, peaceful, respectable ideas. But Mnuchin, as LaRouche made clear, was with the old crowd, with the Bushes. Well, with the Bushes, that's enough to identify what kind of policies we've always been opposed to in the LaRouche group. And even though I'm past my most effective points, having had a stroke, I can still remember that. And it comes up now. Why don't we again bring up the point that Stephen Mnuchin does not belong in the Trump administration, and he belongs in jail? He belongs with no administration.
Well, I don't think those are the primary concerns. Trump has a lot of people around him who are very, very problematic. But the issue here is, what is Trump going to do internationally, and what's he going to do on Glass-Steagall? The only real powerful issue we have to fight in terms of getting the Trump administration to move are those 2. And we have momentum. I'm not going to go into it now. I don't think that should be the subject of the discussion. But as I'm sure you know, there has been considerably positive motion from the Trump administration, including even Gary Cohn, who was CEO of Goldman Sachs, but who has said quite strongly that the Trump administration wants to divide commercial banking and investment banking. The fact that there is serious motion coming from the Trump administration, which, believe me, Wall Street and the British know comes entirely because of Lyndon LaRouche. It wouldn't exist. This is just another proof of the fact that history is made through the power of ideas, and that whether or not we're whispering in Trump's ear is not the issue. The issue is the Glass-Steagall idea is out there because of years, decades of our fighting to bring that issue to bear in the Congress, around the country, and so forth, to the point where now that the collapse that we had in 2008 and the growing recognition, at least in the banking community, that we're now on the brink of a collapse at least as bad or potentially far, far worse than 2007 and 8, is driving them into hysterics, where they're writing daily articles screaming at the top of their lungs in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and so forth against Glass-Steagall, meaning they know full well that this is a very real potential. So without saying any more on that, the other point is this international issue. If Trump, as Helga said, if Trump joins the Silk Road, everything else is going to fall into place. This is the way we have to look at this administration, and not getting, I mean, we have to take note of the fact that there are some people in there who are telling Trump bad things. We certainly saw it in the intelligence community on Syria. There's no question. But on the other hand, the 2 key issues that we have the most power to influence and the most responsibility to influence are to force this Glass-Steagall reality into people's minds in the context of this emerging crisis, which is liable to blow up literally any week or any month this year, in terms of the fact that the bubble Under Obama and under Dodd-Frank, nothing was done to stop the speculating, the gambling, the looting of the physical economy in order to sustain the bankrupt banking institutions. That this is ready to blow apart, and we can and we must take this moment of opportunity, both on the domestic economic issue, the Glass-Steagall fight, and on the global issue, and not look at it as personalities. It's a battle over ideas, over concepts, and our ability to mobilize the population to take personal responsibility. Like as Dennis brought up, I'm very happy with this development in the Philippines with Duterte and a good friend of ours who's a leading journalist and a former ambassador, Rigoberto Tiglao, who has joined in this fight to shut down the New York Times. I mean, these are issues that the world can be brought to bear to focus on the actual criminals in the United States, which are Wall Street and the media and so forth, on the issues of our definition. We define the issues. We don't respond to their pseudo issues, their fake news. The issue is Glass-Steagall, the issue is the New Silk Road. And it's on that basis that we can and we must have the self-assured capacity to use our creativity to the highest we possibly can to have an effect on these fights as they take place, which is right now. It's going to be decided in the very, very near term.
Yes, Mike, but my mind slipped. This guy, Mnuchin, I believe it was back in the 70s or the 80s when he somehow got into an administration as the Treasury Secretary, and LaRouche made the statement, this guy does not belong there. And that's what I was trying to recall. And I think that looking into that point can get somebody who may still be doing dirty work for an oligarchy, remove the effect of his having been in an administration of the United States.
Right. Well, he is there, so we have to act with our authority. That's my point. You know, the point is to implement our policy, not just to fight against the people in there who are arguing for the wrong policy. We have to fight to implement ours.
Okay, let me give one example. Since Mike brought it up again, he referenced the journalist Rigoberto Tiglao. So there was an op-ed in the Manila Times by him called "Let Filipinos Condemn and Boycott the New York Times." And he said, among other things, "I'm sick and tired of the New York Times articles and editorials that are vicious hatchet jobs, not just on President Duterte, but on the Philippines itself. The New York Times has portrayed our country as one where thousands of corpses of the innocent litter our streets, and that we Filipinos, and therefore even columnists like me, either just keep quiet in fear of Duterte, or that we are savages living in and embracing a failed state." He goes on and says many other things, but I want to come to the end. He says, "I dare the New York Times to name a single political opponent of this regime and or a single child killed by Duterte's alleged death squads." And finally, he says, "With this maliciously cruel and destructive set of attacks that the New York Times has been unleashing against our country, we should all condemn this publication, and patriotic Filipino New Yorkers should boycott it. I urge my readers to do a patriotic act and write the New York Times letters of complaints against their coverage and editorials. Let's show these AHs," Duterte, the president, had called the Times assholes. "Let's show these AHs we're not pushovers and will not allow biased reportage to slur our country." So that's a useful example of what we're talking about, what Mike just said, that's what we should be concerned about, is our allies and the work that we can do to change this situation directly. So next question.
Let me add something, Dennis. I just found out last night from our friend Butch Valdez in the Philippines that I missed an article by our friend Kit Tatad, the former senator of the Philippines, who also writes for the Manila Times, who apparently wrote a long column on Helga LaRouche's speech at the April conference. So I'll be looking that up. I forgot to look it up this morning. I meant to. I'll look it up this afternoon and hopefully get that in the briefing right away. So, you know, again, this is just further demonstration of the fact that our influence globally comes to bear because we are looking at these things from the highest level and not from the bottom up. And therefore, we inspire people everywhere in the world to take action on that basis.
Good.
Okay, I was thinking about the British Empire following the U.S. because after World War II, the British Empire was completely destroyed, at least in the economic status. Okay, and then U.S. helped there. Okay, but now you said the U.S. under control or following the British Empire. So I want to know how is that, if you understand what I'm saying.
You're saying the Russian bear? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Fire.
British.
Well, yes, you're right. I mean, there were, the key industrialists in the United States who had worked with Roosevelt to build up this American economy and the war machine. Lyndon LaRouche has often pointed out, when we had the auto crisis that preceded the mortgage blowout in the mid 2000s, 2004, 5, and 6, he said we have to do what Roosevelt did with the auto industry back during World War II. We transformed it.
Mike, he actually was asking you a little bit of a different question, which is, if the British Empire was destroyed at the end of the Second World War.
He was saying the British Empire. I'm sorry. I thought he was saying the Russian bear. Okay.
No, the British Empire. He's saying, since as his understanding, the British Empire was destroyed at the end of the Second World War. So how can it be the case that the British Empire today is somehow changing, shaping, organizing, dominating the United States?
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's a very, very important question. Yeah, thanks. Again, as Lynn has pointed out, what was the British Empire? It wasn't the British people. It wasn't even the British economy. It was the City of London, which is that's their Wall Street. It's where all their financial institutions are located, in a city within London called the City of London. And even back in the days of full-scale British colonialism, when they had the British East Indies Company, which colonized Southeast Asia and Africa, the British East Indies Company was not a government institution. It was a private sector banking run institution. When they colonized India, when they waged their opium wars against the Chinese, it was the banks and the private sector financial institutions, with full support from the British monarchy, but not always full support from the British government. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. So the empire was threatened with destruction after World War II. Threatened with destruction. Had Roosevelt lived, had Roosevelt carried out his promise that we would not restore the British and French and Dutch imperial holdings after World War II, then we could have ended it once and for all right there. But Roosevelt died, and as I said, Truman was a puppet. The anti-communist witch hunt in the United States, what you're seeing right now against Trump, all of this hysteria about Trump talked to the Russians, Trump talked to the Russians. This is a direct replay of the McCarthyite period, which should better be called the Trumanite period, because it was Truman who ran this idiot Senator McCarthy, who waged an anti-communist witch hunt in the United States, terrorizing the American people into agreeing to this East versus West divide, godless communism against the free world, a total British manufactured concept, not real at all. Remember that Roosevelt had worked closely with Russia, especially, and with China to defeat the fascist regimes in Germany and Japan. So what happened? The British had long since decided, way back after the Civil War, when they basically were trying to intervene on behalf of the Confederacy to defeat the United States. They never gave up after the American Revolution. They tried over and over again to retake or break up this colonial outpost and turn America into a divided and colonial outpost again. But they made the decision they were going to have to do it from the inside. And this, the long process we could go through, what happened throughout the 20th century. But ultimately, at the end of World War II, the British Empire was able to not only survive because Truman helped the empire go back and take over their colonies, but even more important, they built up Wall Street as a British outpost in the United States, right? That in fact, increasingly, especially after Roosevelt's death, and then emphatically after John Kennedy's death. Kennedy put up a fight against Wall Street. He put up a fight against the British Empire. He was not going to go to war in Vietnam. And they killed him. And that's why they killed him. And from that point forward, despite some positive things coming out of Ronald Reagan and some positive things coming out of Bill Clinton, by and large, since that time, the US has been increasingly controlled lock, stock, and barrel by the British through Wall Street and through their corruption of our intelligence community. So what you're seeing right now with the attack on Trump as a repeat of the anti-communist witch hunt, you know, any connection with Russia is somehow a crime, and the attempt to drag the United States into the kind of warfare that Bush and Cheney and Obama were carrying out on behalf of the British Empire, not on behalf of America. This country gained absolutely nothing from turning the Middle East into a terrorist hellhole by destroying their secular governments in Iraq and Libya and the attempt in Syria with Assad. We gained nothing. The British Empire gained by keeping the world divided and keeping the US on the brink of war with Russia and with China in terms of the fight over Korea and the South China Sea. So, I mean, that's what happened to the British Empire. It's now or never in terms of can we once and for all end the very concept of empire. And that's really what's at stake in what we're involved in today. Like I said, ending war forever. What does that mean? It means ending the idea of empire.
Thank you.
Okay. Next.
Hi, Michael. Thank you. I'm Patrick from Connecticut. As an activist, my job is to present the truth to the people. And right now, our main objective is to be able to get the truth out to the uninformed, because that is where the grip is from the media. It's stopping the people from knowing what is at stake. If they know, then they could do something. So, you know, I've been thinking of all kinds of ways, but, you know, I will invent a way to enroll each and every one of these people and give them the tools to fight with us. And there is a way, and I will find it. And it's through the media, like if it was an iceberg and you put a ship through it, splitting it. Once the truth gets out there, then it will just gravitate. It just go. But this is the only way that I could see to you know, really fight, is to bring the people the truth of what's going on, so they can, you know, help us instead of fight us. And I would like your take on this.
I would only add to that, you know, the idea that the truth will set you free, there's truth to that. But also, as Keats said, truth is beauty and beauty truth. That's all we know and that's all we need to know. I think what's happening in the Manhattan Project is an inspiration to not only the entirety of America, but to the whole world, because you have demonstrated that you can completely integrate what you're describing as sort of mass mobilizing, like with the Hamiltonian and so forth, and trying to get the truth out to people who are inundated with New York Times and similar garbage. But that it's also that you've so beautifully integrated that into this fight to create a true universal chorus. And of course, chorus has many meanings when you think of it that way. It's both the actual musical presentation by groups of people, but it's also the chorus representing mankind as a whole, coming together, creating beauty in a unified way between sovereign individuals, contributing to the idea of mankind's role as a human race and as part of a developing universe. So yes, keep at it, keep singing and keep organizing, keep getting the truth out. We have reason to be optimistic. The danger is obviously very, very great. And is Trump strong enough to live up to the best things that he's promised to do? It's not clear at all. We can't just say we support him or we're against this other one or something. We have to create in ourselves and in the movement that we've created, especially this Manhattan Project, we have to create a demonstration to the world that true humanity is possible and that it's necessary.
Thank you.
Good. We're coming up on time, so this will be our final question.
There was about 2 weeks ago on Channel 13 a movie called Finding Jesus. And I would suggest with the chorus and with the dynamics that are going on today, that we might still be in the process of finding Jesus. So my first question would be,
Time for one. Just do one.
all right, I have 3 questions, but we'll go with the first one here. Greek master philosopher teacher, Jesus, are you the revolution?
Wait, I don't understand what your question is, and I'm going to use the prerogative of myself to stop it. I don't understand what you're saying. And no, we're not going to take that, and we're not going to take it. Thank you. I have a couple of things I want to say, Mike, because you may want to respond to this concerning exactly what is presently confronting us and what Patrick brought up actually is coming out in this. We have a problem in that there's a subject matter that gets presented. The subject matter is not North Korea. The subject matter was and is the New Silk Road. Now, what's happened is that we have won successfully deploying a set of nations or working in collaboration with a set of nations that have been taking ideas that we, as was documented, placed in motion 25 years ago. Or Mike described the work in particular of Kathy Wolf going back to 1992 and work that Lyndon LaRouche did actually when he came out of jail in 1994. And then the relationship between that and what's going on with China, other things. So we present this, we presented it also 2 weeks ago, and Mike also presented it 2 weeks ago. Here, one of the elements that we just, Mike alluded to on the issue of culture and on the issue of music is essential to consider when we look at this problem of how to compose a question. Unfortunately, although we have tried to be as explicit as possible about the role of music, it is completely misunderstood by most. And I want to say something about it here because John isn't here, and I just want to take a crack at pointing out one element. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote a set of pieces to teach people how to think. And they were called, well, all of his pieces were for that, but they were called the two-part inventions. And the two-part inventions were how you create a musical idea, which is the same thing as how you create an idea at all. And the idea was not merely, they're not called two-part, that's the way it's actually talked about by the illiterates. It's actually called the two-voiced inventions. I was able to, on occasion, down at Fisk University, I got a chance to take a look at their curriculum. This is for former slaves and for people who were freedmen who were working down in Tennessee. And they taught the Bach, and they refer to them as two-voiced inventions. So the idea of a dialogue and the idea of having a dialogue and the idea of the LaRouche dialogue on Saturday is to come by or invent a new way of thinking. What happens sometimes is that this is not paid close enough attention to. So you take something, for example, like the issue that came up earlier on the Mnuchin matter. Why is this not an issue? It wasn't clear to the questioner why it wasn't an issue. That's why I asked the second question. But the reason it's not an issue is because we stand right now in the position to change all of history through the actions of people in this room, figuring out how to replicate what you heard Mike do with people that you either know or don't know. And that is sufficient to resolve the problem of Stephen Mnuchin. That actually resolves that problem. I think this is important to say because the conception that Bach was working on in showing people how discoveries and inventions actually happen, that subject is the subject of our work here every week. And it's just important, I think, that this be stated, because sometimes we get people that come to the microphone and you don't think about what you're saying. And you're posing something that's not a question. So it's not possible to answer you because it isn't a question. Now, the importance of what we're trying to do in the Manhattan Project has been successful. We have now come to the point that lens for laws in the form of what the president recently talked about, this so-called Europe, the Silk Road in space. Donald Trump didn't use that term, and he only spoke to the astronauts, the American astronauts, but the Chinese have used that term. And the combination of the Silk Road as we know it and the Silk Road in space, it now allows us access to the presidency of Donald Trump in a completely different way if we choose to act on that. So I'm saying this because I think why it's important to say here is that we have 2 weeks, or I guess it's the 14th and 15th, so that's right, 16 days. And we have to get Trump. We want to get Donald Trump. We hope to get Donald Trump to Beijing. And my question for you is this. What would be the importance at this point of our succeeding in actually getting Donald Trump to come to Beijing?
Well, in a sense, I can answer the last question as well as yours, because I think the only way to find Jesus is that you need a two-part invention, a two-voiced invention. You have to find Jesus and find Confucius. Otherwise, you won't succeed in finding either. And I think that's what you're getting at, Dennis, because what we have to teach is not just the truth in some formal sense. We have to convey creativity. We have to demonstrate creativity to a population whose capacity to create has been driven out by economic depravity, by drugs, by degraded noise, which they call music and entertainment. The creative spark has been crushed in many, many, many people. And you're not going to restore that spark by just telling them things, you know. You have to convey to them a concept which is so powerful and so huge that they simply are able to brush aside all the horror within their minds, all the crap. The very last aria in Bach's St. Matthew Passion is called Mache euch dein Herze rein, which make your heart pure. Make yourself pure, my heart, so that I can bury Jesus in my heart. I myself will bury Jesus in my heart. But to do so, you have to make your heart pure. It's a very, very powerful aria. And I think that's what we have to convey globally, is that your ability to be human has been denied you from your childhood. Your ability to participate in beauty, create beauty, to participate in a human race which works together for great accomplishments for the future, to create an environment far, far better for our posterity than we have ourselves. These ideas have been, driven out by the horrible culture that's been shoved down our throats from childhood. So all of that is now accessible. And like I said, I think, the Manhattan Project is a model for humanity, because it's demonstrating that you can do that and that it works. It works to inspire people to the idea that all mankind can work together for a future and not be driven to fight each other over scraps. That's all.
Okay, good. So that'll conclude our session for today. I want to thank everybody for being here. And we should make sure that this is reproduced and circulated otherwise among all the networks that we can possibly connect to. Okay?